outbreak, which it was the final straw for tornado civil defense. Particularly, we're going to look at how the most severe outbreak at the time fundamentally changed how the NWS forecasted tornadoes, especially with the summary of this outbreak. We will see how that happened. So, of course, start with the overview. A lot of pictures here, but that's for a reason. First up is that this outbreak saw the usage of a blanket tornado warning, which is something not seen again until the 74 super outbreak. Ah! Thank you for the follow, Beans. What the fuck? This outbreak was extremely potent. Literally, the first tornado was an F4, which occurred right here on this bigger right-hand side picture. And very generously, all the tornadoes are numbered in the order that they occurred. And as you can see, many of them are long track. So this tornado outbreak did indeed produce 24 intense, meaning F3 plus, tornadoes. Thankfully, there were 0 F5s, but there were 18 F4s. This singular outbreak produced 2 separate cases of twin tornadoes, something that is very rare. Twin tornadoes are not common in the slightest. And we will be talking about 4 notables today. But before we get on to that, I do want to note that again, all the tornadoes listed here in this biggest picture, this pink box is for this image to its left, noting most of the ones in Indiana. And then this smaller pink box is for this even smaller picture that is above the biggest one. And these are the 2 tracks of the cases of twin tornadoes. So this southerly one happened first, and then this northerly one happened only an hour later. Very close to each other. Before we get into the notables, I do want to talk about what made this outbreak possible, because this outbreak was indeed a record setter and would not be broken until 1974. So, very disturbingly, there were conditions that were extremely similar, if not possibly almost identical to that caused the tri-state tornado, which went from Missouri to Indiana. This included minimum dew points of 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is absolutely insane. There was record-breaking vertical shear at the time, and a weather balloon launched from Dodge City, Kansas, reported winds aloft in the air of 185 miles per hour. That is way too much. And as you can see here, labeled in a pink oval is the jet stream. As you can see, some very, very intense winds. So this means that you are going to have guaranteed long track cyclic supercells, which should sound familiar because that is what the tri-state tornado spawned from. A long track, at first cyclic supercell. As you can see here, in this bottom left though, there were also multi-vortex tornadoes. This also would create multi-vortex. And these are actually discovered by Dr. Ted Fujita, who would go on to invent the Fujita scale. Wow. So again, let's now start with the notables here. The Crystal Lake, Illinois F4. This is a relatively famous picture of a truck inside the I guess would be the basements of where a house was, but is no longer there after this F4. This F4 is known to have rapidly widened after it was created to 400 meters and possibly recycled and widened even further to around 730 meters. It is unknown if it did recycle or if this was another supercell. We do know specifically about the Crystal Lake F4 is that it did kill 6 and injure 75 and caused $1.5 million in damage. And there was either two options for houses that were struck. They were either moved off of their foundations or were obliterated. There was not really any other option for houses that were hit by this F4. Next up here are the Midway, Indiana F4s, and this is by far the most well-known case of twin tornadoes to ever exist. But that if you look up twin tornadoes, you are likely to find this exact image in this sequence of 6. And very technically, these were not twin tornadoes, it was just a twin funnel. And as seen here in the sequence, after the most famous photo, these funnels did indeed merge and combine into a one complete funnel that was 2 miles wide. And these tornadoes set a wind record of 151 miles per hour or 243 kilometers per hour that was not broken until 1991. And then that record in 91 was not broken until May 3rd, 99 in Oklahoma. But this twin funnel tornado killed 44 people, unfortunately, and injured close to 600 and caused $32 million in damage. And of course, to make things worse, this tornado was accompanied by downbursts and microbursts, which is just adding salt to the wound. The next notable is actually it's actually the separate case of twin tornadoes that we saw. The Dunlap, Indiana F4s, and the president at the time, Lyndon B. Johnson, seen here surveying the damage that these tornadoes caused. We do know that these twins injured 321 people and unfortunately killed another 36 Indianers. I'm sure they don't like that, I'm sorry. But surprisingly, despite these being twins, there were actually no known photographs of these twins. I did try to look up Indiana F4 twins, and all I got were the images above. All I got were these images from the previous tornadoes. But many small communities after Dunlap and before Dunlap were wiped away from the map. And most notable is that these tornadoes were possibly F5 in strength, although these records are too sparse to truly verify, and that these only happened 1 hour after the Midway F4s. And at an intersection in Dunlap, there now stands a memorial, pictured here at the bottom left, for the people who were killed and to remember these 4 tornadoes. The last notable of this outbreak, though, is the Alto, Indiana F4. And before Alto, in its path, was Russiaville, which is an interesting name, especially during the Cold War. But Russiaville only had 10% of its town left after it was hit by this F4. We do not have any pictures of Russiaville, though, unfortunately, or any pictures of the funnel itself. What we do know is that it widened to 1.6 kilometers, that's a mile wide before it hit Alto, and then proceeded to strike Alto. This tornado did cause $500 million in damage and killed 18 and injured 835 people. So, a short summary of the outbreak itself is that this was the most intense outbreak of all time at the time. It was Dr. Fujita recorded, and one of his first that we know of that was recorded by him. He would later go on to invent the Fujita scale for rating tornadoes, which would later be enhanced to the enhanced Fujita scale, go figure. He would also pioneer the discovery of microbursts and downbursts, and is probably one of the most influential meteorologists of all time. This outbreak caused the NWS to completely rework the way it forecasted tornadoes, particularly because there was confusion within the public of the previous system. We're talking that the NWS would issue a tornado alert for a wider area, and then, as still is today, a smaller area would get the tornado warning. But the public was confused as to the warning would override the alerts when that is not the case. What is now used and is still used today, like I just said, is the watch warning emergency system where it supersedes each other. So the watch is used to signify that that conditions are favorable for tornadoes, and is essentially what the alerts did back then, but watch is a much better way of saying it because rather you should be watching for the possibility of tornadoes, not be alert for tornadoes. Because the usage of the word alert does sound like warning. And of course, warning is still used, and the tornado emergency is still experimentally used today. This outbreak also did lead to the creation of Skywarn, the NWS's spotter network. However, not, uh, rather, I should rephrase, all spotters and tracers, if they do choose to become tracers, are still amateurs, despite the fact that they all are indeed part of Skywarn, which is something that's a little odd. But I digress. One thing that is not the outbreak's fault and is not, rather, sorry, is not the period's fault is that phone networks got jammed. Phone networks were jammed just because it was, I mean, this is 1965. You couldn't handle that much info trying to run through the system. And as you can imagine, if the networks are jammed, this leads to immensely slow info relay times. We're talking that those tornadoes that struck Michigan were not able to be properly warned about because the tornadoes had already struck Indiana. Indiana NWSs were trying to warn Michigan NWSs that conditions are indeed favorable for strong tornadoes, but they couldn't. And that's that wouldn't happen today because not only because of forecast advances, but because we have better phone networks, as you can imagine. Technology is advanced. No cookies to those who guessed about that there. But most importantly, this outbreak did see the repurpose of civil defense sirens, which would which are really were air raid sirens into tornado sirens. So these still do serve the purpose of civil defense, you could say. And last but not least, as is with the first bullet point, that these records set by these 65 Palm Sunday outbreak were not broken until the 74 Super outbreak. However, that is all for today. A very, very important outbreak in history here. Many advances in technology and the way that tornadoes are warned were spurred on not just by outbreaks before this, but particularly spurred on from this outbreak. Civil defense for tornadoes was started all the way back in the 50s, and particularly with the 52 outbreak that in which an F5 struck Waco, and that started the final trend for civil defense really ramping up in gear, and it took until now for everything to finally come together, which is unfortunate, but glad that we have it now, of course. So, again, that's all I have for today. Thank you much for staying until the end, and I'll see you guys next time.